Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are taking a look at someone you probably think you already know, Cleopatra. But honestly, if your idea of her is just this doomed beauty queen or some tragic romantic victim of Roman ambition, well, get ready because we are about to completely upend that. We're going to step through the strategic playbook of a genuine mastermind. You see, for over 2 millennia, the narrative surrounding the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt has been totally dictated by her enemies and, dramatists. But when we actually look at the raw history, a vastly different and frankly way more compelling picture emerges. We're looking at the true architect of Egyptian power.
To really understand this extraordinary ruler, we basically have to follow one simple directive. Forget everything you've been told. Okay, let's dive into this. We are completely throwing out the romantic illusions, the Shakespearean tragedies, and the Hollywood scripts. It's time to uncover a masterclass in pure, unadulterated political strategy. The ancient world was an incredibly unforgiving place, especially for a woman wielding absolute power. The historical record reveals someone who didn't survive by just batting her eyelashes, but by playing a high-stakes geopolitical game with unmatched precision.
Section 1. Shattering the Beauty Myth.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how starkly it contrasts that classic Hollywood trope with the gritty historical reality. The myth tells us she won her throne through sheer physical beauty and some fateful, intoxicating romance. But the reality? Far more brutal and way more fascinating. She didn't win her throne with beauty. She won it with a staggering body count and an unmatched intellect. I mean, Cleopatra was a polyglot who spoke as many as 12 languages. She was deeply educated in mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy. She was navigating this profoundly lethal political landscape in Alexandria, where literally a single misstep meant assassination by poisoning or a dagger in the dark. Actually, her own family tree was just littered with relatives who had murdered each other for the crown. In that kind of environment, survival isn't a sweeping love story. It's a deeply calculated series of mergers and acquisitions driven by an incredibly sharp analytical mind.
Section 2. Exile and Comeback Strategy.
Look at this timeline, because the speed of her initial downfall was just lightning fast. At age 18, right after the death of her father, she's crowned Queen of Egypt, meant to co-rule with her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy XIII. But by age 19, she's a fugitive, running for her life across the harsh desert. In a single year, her own brother's fiercely ambitious political advisors, the men who actually controlled the military and the treasury, managed to orchestrate her complete removal from power. They seized the capital, entirely stripped her of her authority, and forced her completely out of the country, into the treacherous sands of Syria.
When her enemies pushed her into exile, they made a massive fundamental miscalculation. They assumed that a 19-year-old deposed queen, stripped of her loyal guards, her vast wealth, and her palace, would just quietly fade into the background. They genuinely thought the harsh realities of exile would break her, or that she'd simply resign herself to obscurity like so many overthrown royals before her. But man, they drastically underestimated her ruthlessness and her sheer will to rule. This miscalculation didn't end her story. It merely set the stage for one of the most dramatic, highly calculated comebacks in human history. She didn't retreat. Instead, she began quietly raising a mercenary army right on Egypt's borders, waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike back.
Section 3. The Ultimate Political Merger.
So this brings us to that famous historical relationship, which at its core was purely transactional. It was basically a perfect symmetrical alignment of geopolitical assets between two highly ambitious leaders. On one side, Cleopatra desperately needed an experienced, heavily armed military force to crush her brother's supporters and reclaim her throne. On the other side, Julius Caesar is embroiled in his own wildly costly Roman civil wars, and he desperately needs Egypt's legendary gold reserves to fund his legions and secure his political dominance back in Rome. Most people remember this grand romance of the ancient world, but the reality was a cold, calculated business deal. She had the unlimited funds, he had the unstoppable force. It was a mutual acquisition of assets that would forever alter the balance of global power.
But how exactly do you pitch a massive political merger to a Roman general when you're a hunted fugitive with a bounty on your head? Well, you get smuggled past enemy guards into a heavily fortified palace hidden inside a laundry bag. Or perhaps a rough bed sack or a rug, depending on which historical account you favor. Regardless of the exact fabric, just think about the gritty, undignified, and utterly terrifying reality of that moment. The literal Queen of Egypt willingly endured being rolled up in linens, hoisted onto the shoulder of a trusted servant, and carried right through hostile territory. She risked immediate discovery and absolute certain death by her brother's assassins, all just to get a physical seat at the negotiating table with Caesar. That is the thrilling, extreme length she was willing to go to for her survival.
Section 4. The Art of Imperial Survival.
Let's move to and see how this built, because the outcomes of her high-stakes political merger were completely ruthless and deeply decisive. The immediate result of securing her alliance was a full-blown civil war that tore through the streets of Alexandria. Her brother and fiercest political rival was utterly defeated, his forces completely crushed by veteran Roman legions. He ultimately drowned, his body left at the bottom of the Nile River, literally weighted down by his golden armor. And Cleopatra? She was placed securely back on the throne, her opposition entirely neutralized. Her immense, wildly calculated risk had paid off flawlessly, restoring her as the absolute sovereign of the wealthiest nation in the Mediterranean.
So, the crucial point is right here. She didn't wait for a hero, she hired an empire. This completely bypasses that traditional, passive narrative of a queen in distress needing to be saved by a strong Roman general. Actually, scratch that. She was never the damsel. She brilliantly used her nation's immense wealth, its critical grain supply, and its strategic geography as ultimate leverage. She quite literally hired the greatest military machine on Earth to do her heavy lifting, effectively weaponizing Rome's own internal conflicts for her absolute benefit.
The true mechanics of power reveal a harsh but incredibly vital truth about human nature and leadership. Survival is absolutely not about being universally loved or, maintaining a pristine public image. It is entirely about choosing the right ally before your enemies have the chance to outmaneuver you. In a totally cutthroat environment, identifying mutual leverage and acting proactively are really the only mechanisms that ensure you stay in the game. Cleopatra understood that her security lay not in sentiment, but in making herself utterly indispensable to the people who held the swords.
We can take this 2,000-year-old power dynamic and apply it directly to our own modern lives. Whether you're navigating corporate business structures, local politics, or just your own personal career strategy, the underlying rules of leverage and alignment haven't actually changed that much since the days of ancient Alexandria. Finding mutual benefit is still the ultimate trump card. So it leaves us with this final thought. In a world of empires, who are your allies?